If you have a hard time setting boundaries, this video is for you. If you've been to my channel before, welcome back. If not, I'm Ross and I'm an intuitive counselor. Today's topic is boundaries, saying yes when you mean no. And I just want to start by saying that this is a massive topic. And in the short time that I'm going to speak in this video, I'm probably not going to do a complete justice, but really what this video is going to be about is inspiring and hopefully creating some thoughts and different ways of thinking about boundaries and beginning a dialogue or conversation. And I might end up doing a follow-up video in regards to this topic. So let's start with what is a boundary? And I think the truth is that many of us don't really know what a boundary is. It's not like they teach this in school. And I think we kind of know about boundaries because we've had them crossed by other people, or we know that we've had a hard time establishing boundaries. So a boundary is, I love this expression of a way of being a good friend to yourself. It's also in its most simplest form, it's a yes or a no. And the thing about boundaries is they can be physical, they can be mental, they can be spiritual, they can be emotional, they can be sexual. There's all sorts of ways that boundaries show up. And the thing about them is that, the boundaries we see in our physical life are like fences and doors and locks. And when it comes to our boundaries as humans, it can be a little bit more complicated because they may not be visible. And we all might have a different relationship to what our needs are in terms of our boundaries. And so let's start also with what makes boundaries difficult to establish. And this, I believe, really has its roots in our early childhood experiences and our early relationships. And what it comes down to is that we often were the recipients of having our boundaries crossed. And if I think back to my childhood, I had a mother who was really always not respecting my boundaries, especially when it came to my room. She would come in without knocking. She would not leave when I asked her to leave. And I found that super frustrating. And essentially my voice wasn't heard. On the other hand, I think we've also been the recipient of a boundary and feeling like it kind of hurts when someone sets a clear boundary with us. It's like there's sort of a pain that comes, and that can prevent us from wanting to establish a boundary as well. But ultimately, what it comes down to is that we need to be in relationship, especially when we're younger. We need our caregivers to be there for us, and we need that. It's a priority. And as we go into relationships later in our life, we want to maintain that connection. And so, on some level, there's this story that gets created about the fact that if I set a boundary, I might lose connection. And that can be very problematic, especially for those of us that are prone to being rejected or feel abandoned. It's like the last thing we want to do is create a situation where someone abandons us because of what is important to us. The other thing I want to say is that this conversation about boundaries can be very challenging because often, and this has been my experience whenever I talk about boundaries with others, is unfortunately it brings up the memories of all the times we didn't set a boundary, and that is really hard to face. And so I just really invite you to really have some gentleness and compassion for yourself as you think about this topic. And I really want to kind of make it simple and less complicated, because the truth is that we all have a right to our sovereignty, and part of that comes from being able to set boundaries and be able to say no when we mean no and say yes when we mean yes. And one of the things I always like to say is that when you say no to someone, you're actually saying yes to yourself. And so I love that reframe of, like, saying a yes for you, and even though it might feel like a no to someone else. So let's get into what is it that makes a boundary important, and how does it become defined? And when I think of boundaries, I think it's really important to know that you need to be connected to your values. You need to be connected to what you stand for. Values are like the rebar and cement. values are the things that are uniquely important to you. And so part of being able to set a boundary is being able to know yourself, being able to know what's important to you, being able to know what you stand for. When you know those things and you're connected to them, then it becomes easier to take a stand for them. So how does this show up in everyday life? I mean, one of the things that, in the most simplest ways, um, the example that comes up for me is working in a work environment, and someone says, "Hey, can you take my shift?" And you don't really want to, but you say yes, even though you really want it to be a no, and you're not able to say no. And so you say yes, and then you take that shift, and you end up being resentful and frustrated because you really didn't want to do it. And for me anyway, a lot of making boundaries simpler is really thinking ahead of time, like, what is it that I'm going to say when someone asks me? And when it comes to that scenario of will you take my shift? My answer would be, right now it's a no, but if it changes to a yes, I'll get back to you. And so language makes it really simple. If you kind of have a script, or if you have an answer right away. This comes up a lot when working with addicts and alcoholics at the treatment centers I worked at. The question comes up, it's like, what do you do when someone offers you a drink? And we would always talk about scripting that. Like, what are you going to say when someone comes at you with that request? And how are you going to respond? And if you don't think about it ahead of time, then you're on the spot. Whereas if you have a script, you can very quickly say whatever's true for you. So for me, it would be like, I don't actually drink, and thank you, but no thank you. It can be that simple. And that helps to make it simpler. Now, there's all sorts of more complicated scenarios that can come up. I think about the dynamics in families, and the requests that can be made, or the classic one of, hey, can you help me move? Uh, all sorts of scenarios that I can think of that can be hard to respond to. And it's just really important to remember that in most cases, when you set a boundary, you're also going to receive respect. If someone walks away because you've set a boundary, to me, that's an indicator of something deeper going on in the relationship that needs attention, and perhaps something that is going to come to your awareness. So it is true that when you set boundaries and when you're clear about what you want and don't want, then you do run the risk of losing relationship. You do have the risk of someone walking away. But in the long run, you're going to feel better about yourself, because you're going to feel a sense of integrity and a sense of alignment within yourself. And that is really, really important. And so I guess if I was to sum it up, boundaries is a long-term proposition. It's not going to change overnight. It's not necessarily going to be easy, but it does have a long-term payoff. And that long-term payoff is that you get to be aligned with yourself and feel at peace with yourself, even when you're saying no. And and then realizing that when you say no, you're actually saying yes to you. You're going to get your time back. You're going to get consistency, and you're going to be surrounded by people who respect you and care for you, because you are clear about what you want and what you don't want. So I think I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any comments, please share them below. If you have a topic that you'd like me to cover in a future video, you can also leave that in the comments. If you know someone who would benefit from this message, please feel free to share them. And if you're interested in the work that I do, you can visit my website, which is in the notes below or in my bio. So thanks so much for joining. I'm sending you unconditional love, and we'll see you again next time.